Shechas Yevamos Daf Yud Gimel concludes the Gemara's comments on the first Mishnah of the Masechta and introduces the second Mishnah of the Masechta. So the Gemara will comment on the last few lines in the Mishnah, and then we will introduce the next Mishnah, which will discuss the 6 types of arayos that cannot be married to a person's brother, and therefore do not have a circumstance of pater and gibum. The Mishnah will also introduce Machlokas Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai about the concept of a tsaras erva. The Gemara will analyze the sources for that, and then generally get into the concept of Machlokas and Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai and how they dealt with situations in which they agreed about key topics. So let's begin. The Gemara is analyzing the last few lines in the Mishnah. So the Mishnah had said in its halachos that there's a concept of a tsaras tsara, that if a woman is pater from yibum because her tsara was an erva, and then that tsara, she goes and becomes tsara to another brother, she marries another brother, that is, she does yibum with a third brother, and that brother has another wife, and then they fall back to the original yavam. So let's spell out the case. So you have Ruvain, who's married to a erva to Shimon, and Reuven has another wife. Reuven dies without children. The erva is pater from Yibum, and the tzara is pater from Yibum as well. Then the tzara does Yibum to Levi, who is not related to her. Levi has another wife, who is the tsaras tzara. She's the tzara of the erva. Then Levi dies without children. They fall to Yibum to Shimon again. So the tzara is pater still because she was originally a tsaras erva when she was married to Reuven, and her tsaras tzara is pater as well. So the Gemara says, what is the source of this halacha that there's a tsaras tzara that's a patur? The Gemara gives 2 sources. The Huda says it's learned out from a pasuk, and that is because the Torah, when it describes the isser to marry a wife's sister, it says lo sikach litzror. Extra word litzror is to tell me tsaros harbi. There are many different types of tsaros. There's the tzara and the tsaras tzara. So that's Rabbi Huda's argument. Rav Ashi says it's logical. The tzara herself has the halacha of the erva, just like the erva paters her tzara, and the erva makes the tzara to be just like the erva herself. So the tzara herself becomes just like the erva herself, and therefore she can also pater her tzara, and this can continue going on, and down the line, a tzara can pater its tzara, and that tzara can pater her tzara in subsequent marriages, as far as you would like for it to continue. Okay, the Gemara now goes to the next line in the Mishnah. The Gemara is discussing the halacha that a tsaras tzara is that the Gemara is discussing the halacha that a tsaras erva, who we said is pater. So the Mishnah said that's only if at the time that the husband dies and they fall to yibum, they are still tsaros, meaning both are still married to the brother who died. Reuven is married to, let's say, the daughter of Shimon and another woman. They both fall to Yibum. So the daughter of Shimon is an erva, and therefore she's pater from Yibum. She also paters her tzara from Yibum. Now the Mishnah had said that if the daughter pulls out of this marriage by any manner before the Yibum happens, then there is no longer any patur on the tzara. So if the daughter of Shimon, before Reuven dies, if the daughter of Shimon, if she is divorced, or she dies, or she does mian, or in any way gets out of the marriage, her tzara is no longer a tsaras erva, and therefore she is not pater. She is obligated to the yibum to Shimon. Now the Gemara says this seems to indicate that that's true even if they were married to Reuven at the same time. That is, that the daughter of Shimon got out of the marriage after Reuven married the tzara. So there was some time in which they were both married to Reuven at the same time. There was some time in which the tzara was actually a tsaras, was a tzara of this woman who is the daughter. She was really a tsaras erva at some point. She just wasn't a tsaras erva at the time that the yibum happened, at the time that Reuven died. So the Gemara says that's contradictory to a later Mishnah, which seems to indicate that it's only true that the tzara is now obligated in yibum if they were never really tsaros, that the erva and the tzara were never co-wives at the same time, and that would happen if the erva was removed from the marriage before the tzara ever married Reuven. So the case then would be that Reuven is married to the daughter of Shimon. Reuven then divorces, for example, the daughter of Shimon, and then Reuven marries another woman. That woman was never really a co-wife with the daughter of Shimon, and therefore when Reuven dies and she falls to Yibum, she's not a tzaras erva because she never had a moment. So it doesn't go by when the moment of falling to Yibum happened, when the moment the Ruvain died happens, it goes by, did they ever have any connection at all? Now, what's the brisa that indicates that this seems to be the halacha? It's a Mishnah. So the Gemara quotes a Mishnah later, which gives a complex case. More complex than we need it to be, but that's the case there. And it seems to show that the only time, like we said, that the tzara is pater, that the tzara is chayiv in Yibum and doesn't have a p'tur of tzaras erva if she was never a co-wife at the same time as the erva. What's the case? Somewhere it says 3 brothers. Reuven, Shimon, Levi. Shimon and Levi are married to sisters, and Reuven's married to a woman who's not related. Okay? Now, Reuven dies. So the first thing that happens, the Mishnah says, is that Shimon divorces his wife. Shimon was married to a sister of Levi's wife. Shimon and Levi are married to sisters. Shimon divorces his wife. Now, that wife is now out. Now, Reuven then dies, his wife falls to Yibum, and Shimon does Yibum. So now after Shimon divorced his wife, who's the sister of Levi's wife, he now marries this other strange woman who happened to got him from Yibum. That's not relevant to the case, but now he has another wife. They were never married at the same time. That is, Reuven's first wife, who was the sister of Levi's wife, was not married. Shimon's first wife, who was the sister of Levi's wife, was never married to Shimon at the same time as his second wife. Then Shimon dies, and his wife, the only one he has, his second wife, falls to Yibum to Levi. Now this woman is not related to Levi or to Levi's wife. However, she's the second wife of Shimon, and Shimon's first wife was Levi's wife's sister, which is an erva. So in this case, the Mishnah says the wife, that is Shimon's second wife, is chayiv in Yibum to Levi. Now the Mishnah here talks about a case where the second wife only married Shimon after the removal of the first wife, who was an erva. That would seem to indicate that had she married Shimon before the removal of the erva, then she would be pater from Yibum, even though at the time that Shimon died, they were not both there anymore. She had already divorced Shimon's sister-in-law. So that is a contradiction to our case. So the Gemara offers 2 approaches to resolve it. The Gemara says, first of all, you're right, it's a machlokes. They don't agree. What's a machlokes based on? The machlokes is based on when does the moment of Yibum occur. So let's go to a regular case where you have just Reuven and Shimon. When Reuven dies, his wives or wife fall to Yibum. The Yibum takes place at the moment that he dies. That's when the Yibum action happens, and therefore the only relevant moment as far as the question of is there a tzaras erva or not is at that moment. If there is a woman, if the erva is married to him and the tzara is married to him at that moment, then the tzaras erva is pater. And if the erva was divorced earlier, then the tzaras erva is not pater. That's the opinion of our Mishnah. The opinion of the later Mishnah says no. The moment that Yibum happens is retroactively from the time of the original marriage to Reuven. Whenever any woman was married to Reuven, when he dies, it comes out retroactively that there was a connection to Reuven's brother. Now that connection to Reuven's brother is not necessarily going to ever come to fruition. It'll only come to fruition if Reuven dies without children. However, the connection to Shimon happens at the time that she married Reuven. When you marry a man, you also have a connection to his brother until the man has a child who survives. So therefore, whenever the marriage of either of these 2 women happened, that's when the connection was created. At the time that the second wife married Reuven, there was a tzaras erva there. Some point when the marriage happened, when the marriage of the second wife happened, they were both married at the same time, that would pater the Yibum, and there would be no requirement for chalitza either, even if later the marriage of the erva to Reuven was dissolved before Reuven ever died altogether. And that's what that Mishnah there holds. Therefore, the only situation in which the tzaras erva will be chayav Yibum is if the erva dissolved her marriage by whatever means before the tzara ever married her. Therefore, at the time that the tzara married Reuven, she wasn't really a tzara because the erva was gone already and they never overlapped. The Gemara now offers a second answer, and that's simply to say that it's the same author of both Mishnayos. There's no machlokas, it's just a lozu afzu. So the diak we want to make on the second Mishnah is wrong. That is our first Mishnah, which says that the tzara is chayev in yibum. She's not patered, even if they overlapped at some point, as long as the erva is out of the marriage before the yibum occurs, before the falling to yibum occurs. That's the bigger chiddush. And then he says in the later Mishnah, lozu afzu. It's certainly true in a case where they never overlapped, that the tzara would be chayev in yibum. This is a style which we find in Mishnayos. Sometimes we first say the bigger chiddush, now we say, and I don't even need to tell you. Right? It says zu ve'in tzarach lo marzu. That I told you the bigger chiddush, and I don't even need to tell you this small chiddush, which is obviously true as well. We do find such Mishnayos who speak in that manner. The Gemara now moves on to the last case in the Mishnah, which is where you had a tzaras erva. That says you had Reuven was married to an erva, let's say to Shimon's daughter, and he was also married to another woman who's a tzaras erva. But the erva was a ketana. She was a child, and therefore she could do miyun. And she was married off by her mother or her brother, and therefore she's only married midrabanan. So in a case like that, her marriage is only d'Rabbanan. It doesn't really pater her tzara from Yibum mid'araisa. On the other hand, she can't go ahead and do Yibum, as our Gemara will explain here, because there is a marriage mid'Rabbanan. So our Mishnah paskin that she has to do chalitza. The tzaras erva ketana has to do chalitza. She has to do chalitza because she is falling to Yibum mid'Rabbanan. Mid'araisa, because the ketana is not married, the erva is not married, mid'araisa. She can't do a regular yibum, as we will discuss here. So our Gemara asks, why can't she do yibum? Now we understand as long as the ketana is there, she can't do yibum because mid'Rabbanan, she's a tzaras erva. The Gemara asks, though, let this ketana go ahead and actually do miyun. She's a ketana, let her do miyun, which is how a ketana gets out of a marriage, a d'Rabbanan marriage. She just has to say, I don't want to be here anymore. She walks out, and the marriage is dissolved, meikara. It never existed in the first place. If that's true, it's canceled in the first place, never existed. She was never married to Reuven, and therefore Reuven's other wife was never a tzaras erva. Let her go ahead and do yibum like a normal wife. So it says we cannot do that because we have a Gezerah D'Rabbanan that we would not allow that. Now, even though miyun normally dissolves a marriage completely, and none of the other arayas relationships created by that marriage are a problem. So, for example, if a ketana is married to a D'Rabbanan marriage to a man, and then she dissolves that marriage, she's totally mutter to marry that man's father. It's not an isser of her father-in-law because her original marriage to the son never existed. It's dissolved completely retroactively. However, that's only true in a case where she walks out from her husband. If her husband dies and she falls to Yibum, now the Rabbanan do not allow her to just walk out and make the marriage dissolve completely, for the simple reason that it's going to be confused with a real marriage that's dissolved through Chalitza. And people are going to say, oh, look at this. This lady just walked out of the marriage. She didn't have to do Chalitza and she was fine. So they'll think the same thing happens when a regular person falls to Yibum. Therefore, we're not going to allow that. We do consider that there's a permanent connection that cannot be dissolved by miyun, and therefore her tzara will always be a tzaras erva mid'Rabbanan, even if she tries to do miyun and walk out. Therefore, she can never do Yibum. The only solution she has is chalitza. Okay, this concludes the Gemara's analysis of the first Mishnah, and now I get to the next Mishnah. It discusses two separate topics. The first is 6 other types of rayas that do not have the situation of Yibum apply to them. And then the second one will be that Beis Shammai disagrees with the entire concept of tzaras erva, and more about the machlokes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. So the Mishnah says as follows: there are 6 other relationships that you cannot have a situation of them ever falling to Yibum. The reason is that Yibum only happens to 2 brothers that share at least a father. Could share a father and a mother, but they can't share just a mother, have to share at least a father. So Reuven and Shimon share a father. Reuven dies, his wife falls to Yibum. Reuven cannot possibly legally be married to any of these 6 women, from the simple fact that if they are related to Shimon through Shimon's father, they're also related to Reuven through Reuven's father, and therefore could not have ever been married to Reuven. What are these 6 relationships? So they all go through the father. So they are Shimon's mother, who is Shimon's father's spouse. Doesn't have to be married to him. Could just have fathered a child with him. So could not be married to Reuven legally ever. The next one is their father's wife. That is where she was legally married to Reuven and Shimon's father. Can never have been married to Reuven. After that, we have the sister of their father. Their sister through the father, that is the daughter of their father. There's the wife of the father's brother, and the wife of their third brother through the father. All of these are related through the father, and therefore can never be married to Reuven, and therefore cannot fall to Yibum to Shimon. Can't happen. Now, all of these women, if they were married to some other guy who's not related to Shimon, and then there was another wife, there was a tzara, so there were two women married to some other guy, one of them is this relationship to Shimon, and one of them is some other wife, and then that marriage is dissolved, let's say that guy dies, both those women go free. So of course the erva can't marry Shimon, but her tzara, is there a problem with her of being a tzaras erva? No, there's no concept of tzaras erva. Tzaras erva only applies when the tzara and the erva fall to yibum to somebody. If they were just married to a random person with no yibum involved, there is no isser of tzaras erva. Alright, now the Gemara discusses the concept of tzaras erva altogether. Up till now, we've been working under the assumption that a tzaras erva is also. The Gemara says that's Beis Hillel's, the Mishnah says that's Beis Hillel's opinion. Beis Shammai disagrees. Beis Shammai says a tzaras erva is always permitted. There is never any isser. Now, the Mishnah explains that there are some repercussions of this machlokes. So, according to, if you have a tzaras erva, so Beis Shammai says she is mutter and chayev to do yibum, and or chalitza, well, yibum or chalitza. Beis Hillel says there is no yibum or chalitza obligation at all. So what would happen if they actually go ahead and do chalitza? This woman gets chalitza. So according to Beis Shammai, she's a chalutza. That was a real chalitza. Therefore, she's also to a kohen, like any chalutza is also to marry a kohen. Beis Hillel says no, she's not also to a kohen because this chalitza was a fake. There was no isser chalitza. She was this was not a real chalitza, and therefore she does not have any isser created to a kohen. She's mutter to marry a kohen fully, no problem. Now, what happens if she then goes and she does yibum to one of the brothers? So, according to Beis Shammai, that's a perfect yibum. If she then gets freed from that yibum because her new husband dies as well, let's say he dies with children, so there's no further yibum issues. Now she is a regular widow. She didn't do anything wrong. She married a man, he died. She married his brother, he died. Now she's free. No more yibum. She can go marry a kohen, she's just a widow. According to Beis Hillel, though, she was married be'isser. She was married to her husband's brother. In a case of isser, she violated an isser kares. A woman like that is forbidden to kahuna. That's included in the isser of zona. Any woman who is in a forbidden kares marriage is not allowed to marry a kohen afterwards, even if there was no divorce. Okay, so there we have the two cases of machlokes Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai. If she did chalitza, Beis Shammai says she's also to a kohen, Beis Hillel says she's mutter. And if she did yibum afterwards, Beis Hillel would say she's also to a kohen, and Beis Shammai would say she's mutter. So you have cases in which there are women that are forbidden to one and forbidden to the other. Not only that, but if she has a child, so if she had a child, if she did yibum and she had a child, Beis Shammai would say that kid is a perfectly fine kid, nothing wrong with him. He was born from a mutter marriage. Beis Hillel would say he's a mamzer. He's a mamzer. His mother was married to her husband's brother, and that's totally forbidden. Now, says the Mishnah, although they had differences in halacha about who's allowed to marry who and who's a mamzer and who's not, they did not have a problem marrying each other's families. They didn't say, oh, Beis Hillel people can't marry Beis Shammai people. They just made each other aware that there was no halachic issues according to each other's opinion when a marriage was being set up. So it was part of the research they had to do. Is this person a mamzer or perhaps an isser according to our shita? Now the Gemara says the same camaraderie existed as far as the halachas of tumah and tahara, even though they had different rules in tumah and tahara because of their machloksin. They did not refuse to use each other's kalim, saying, hey, maybe his kli is tahar, maybe his kli is tameh. They didn't do that. They were able to lend their kalim to each other. Gemara doesn't say if they were insistent on being matayar the kli before, but they were able to lend the kalim to each other. Okay, now the Gemara begins. The Gemara wants to know what is the source of this machlokes Beis Hillel Beis Shammai. What's it based on? So the Gemara is going to give two explanations. One is that it's based on learning a pasuk, and the other is that it's based on logic. And then the Gemara will get into more deeply the concept of machlokes Beis Hillel Beis Shammai in general and how they work. So first of all, what is the machlokes Beis Hillel Beis Shammai as to whether there is an isser of tzaras erva or not? So the first approach is Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, who says it's how you learn the pasuk. It's based on the pasuk describing yibum, and it says Lo sia eshes hameis hachutza leish zar. How do you translate that? How do you translate the word hachutza? So it says that the wife of the dead brother, so Reuven died without kids, his wife cannot go outside to a strange man. Instead, she has to marry the Yavam. So according to Beis Shammai, the word hachutza here is an adjective. It's describing this woman. She's called the woman who is hachutza. She's a hachutza woman. She's an external woman. What's external about her? So Beis Shammai says what it means to say is that there's an external and an internal. The internal is a relative of Shimon, the brother of Ruvain, and the external is one who is not a relative of Shimon, the brother of Ruvain. Meaning this pasuk is describing a tzaras erva. And it's saying that there's a mitzvah of Yibum, so you read it as follows. This external wife of Ruvain cannot go to marry anybody else. She has to do Yibum. So there you have it. It's talking about a tzaras erva. Now, Beis Hillel disagrees. Beis Hillel says it's not how you translate the word hachutza. The word hachutza means to the outside. It's a verb. She cannot go to the outside. It's saying the wife of the dead Ruvain cannot go to the outside. It's not saying she is an external woman. It's saying she can't go marry somebody else. So it's teaching us the halacha that she cannot marry another person. It's got nothing to do with describing her as an external woman or anything like that. Now, what's this based on how to translate the word? So Beis Shammai says the word hachutza does not the same as the word lachutz. Hachutza is an adjective. She's the external one. Beis Hillel says no. Hachutza is the same as lachutz, to the outside. Whenever you have a lamed at the beginning of a word, you can take the lamed off and put a hey at the end of the word, and it means the same thing. And the Gemara brings a couple of examples of that, like we say. Go to Elim, you could say Elima, Machanaim, Machanima, Mitzrayim, Mitzrayima, Divlasayim, Divlasayma, Yerushalayim, Yerushalayma, Midbar, Midbara. All these things mean to these places, and therefore those are not an issue. Okay, now the Gemara asks, according to Beis Shammai, how do you know the halacha that Beis Hillel learned from this word? How do you know that she's not allowed to go marry somebody else? How do you know that a woman who has a zikas yibum is also to marry anybody else? So Gemara says it's simple. It says le'ishzar, she cannot go to a stranger. It says lo siyeh le'ishzar. This external woman cannot be to a stranger. She has to be to the brother. So that shows that she can't marry somebody else. So the Gemara says, well, that seems like a good argument. Why does Beis Hillel learn from there? So Gemara therefore takes down this entire structure. The Gemara says, yes, Beis Hillel does learn from there, and the word hachutza is translated the way Beis Hillel translated. We're reversing our position. Hachutza means the external. The word hachutza is a descriptive term. It's not saying she can go to the outside, but it's not descriptive the way you think. Hachutza means in arusa. Hachutza means a woman who was never married fully to Ruvain, who falls to Yibum. It's a woman who was just betrothed through Erisin, but never consummated this marriage to Ruvain. If Ruvain then dies, obviously without kids, then she falls to Yibum, even though she was just an Arusa. And that's the meaning of the term Hachutza. Hachutza means someone who's an external wife. She's external in the sense that he never actually brought her into his home. So Gemara says, okay, now how is Beis Shammai going to know that halacha? Beis Shammai knows from the fact that it says Hachutza, extra hey at the beginning. It could have just said Eshes HaMeis Chutza. It calls her Eshes Meis Hachutza. That's to learn two things: the Arusa and the fact that she's a tzaras erva. Both of these have a mitzvah of yibum. Now, Beis Hillel does not have a drasha from the extra hay. He says that's not available for a drasha, and therefore everything works out. All right, that's the Gemara's first way of explaining the machlokes Beis Hillel Beis Shammai. Now the Gemara's second way is that it's based on logic. And Rava says there's a concept called ein isser chal isser. If you have a situation that has one isser on it, you cannot apply another isser on top of the same thing. So, therefore, this woman, the wife of Ruvain, who is a erva to Shimon, we're talking about the erva, so let's say Shimon's wife's sister is married to Ruvain, and Ruvain dies without kids, and therefore she falls to Shimon. So, you cannot have an isser chal al isser. So, the Gemara assumes that this means that the isser Achos Isha, the Isser Erva, cannot apply to this woman who is the wife of Shimon's brother. It means to say as follows. This woman who's falling to Yibum, she's the Erva, and she has a Tzara. So she's related to Shimon in two ways. She's Shimon's brother's wife, and she's Shimon's wife's sister. One of those is the Isser of brother's wife that comes off when Ruvain dies and she falls to Yibum. The other one is the existing condition of being Shimon's wife's sister. That doesn't go anywhere. So the Gemara understands Rav at this point, meaning to say that the Isser of being the wife's sister is never created. So therefore she's never an Achos Isha. The Isser Achos Isha cannot come upon her. She's already the brother's wife. Since she's already the brother's wife, the Isser Achos Isha never applies to her. She never becomes a Tzaras Erva, and therefore she never patters her Tzara. She never becomes an Erva, that is, and therefore she never patters her Tzaras Erva. Someone says that's only true if she was married to Ruvain before Shimon married her sister. That way the Isser Eishes Ach came first, and the Isser Achos Isha applies later. That's where you could say that. What's if it's the reverse? What if she was first in Erva? She was first Shimon's wife's sister, because Shimon first married her sister, and then she married Ruvain and became an Achos, and became an Eishes Ach. The same thing would apply to all the other Arayas, such as the daughter or any of the other ones on the list which exist, which are not marriage based, which exist before she ever became married to Ruvain. So in all of those circumstances, the Isser Erva exists before the Isser Eishes Ach. So the Gemara says no. What Rava really meant was that the Isser Eishes Ach never comes upon her, and therefore the entire concept of Yibum never comes upon her. It's not that she has a mitzvah of Yibum and she's pattered from it because she's in Erva. No, because she's in Erva, the whole concept of Eishes Ach never exists, and the whole concept of Yibum never exists, and therefore there is no situation of Tzaras Erva falling to Yibum here. The Tzaras Erva is never a Tzaras Erva, because the Erva is not falling to Yibum in the first place. The whole concept of Tzaras Erva doesn't exist, because an Erva doesn't have a concept of Yibum, and therefore a Tzaras Erva is never a Tzaras Erva. The whole idea doesn't happen. Okay, that concludes the Gemara's discussion of that. Now the Gemara wants to go back to the Mishnah and analyze the two calculations that we said, how things work out if the Tzaras Erva went and did Chalitza or Yibum. So we said when she went and did Chalitza, so Beis Shammai would say that she is also to a Kohen because it's a real Chalitza. Beis Hillel would say she is mutter to a Kohen because it's not a real Chalitza. So the Gemara says this is obvious. Why do you need to tell me any of this? The Gemara says, I may think that Midrabanan we should consider it a real Chalitza according to Beis Hillel. We should say, hey, it looks like a Chalitza. According to Beis Shammai it's a Chalitza. Maybe Beis Hillel will agree to answer her to a Kohen because of the resemblance of Chalitza here, and therefore the Mishnah is teaching me no, there is no Isser even Midrabanan to a Kohen. The Gemara then asks, why do I need the next case where she did Yibum, where according to Beis Hillel she married Be'isser and she's also a Kohen. According to Beis Shammai she did everything fine and she's moted to a Kohen. The Gemara says we really didn't need this, but once we discussed the halacha of Chalitza, we finished off by talking about the halacha of Yibum. Alright, now the Gemara goes to a different topic, and that's generally analyzing the concept of having machlokes Beis Hillel Beis Shammai, where they each kept their own opinion and have two different sets of halachas in Klal Yisrael. So the Gemara is going to have a different discussion about not having different sets of halachas in Klal Yisrael, which will circle back around to this topic. So the Gemara is referring to the Mishnah Megillah that says that the Chazal set up different people could read the Megillah on different times. Some read it on the 11th of Adar, some on the 12th, some on the 13th, some on the 14th, and in Shushan and Yerushalayim they read it on the 15th of Adar. And the Gemara says that Rish Lakish has of Yochanan that this should be lo sisgodedu. Lo sisgodedu means you should not divide up Klal Yisrael into different groups. Some do mitzvahs here, and others are forbidden to do it there, and some do mitzvahs there, and others are forbidden to do it there. So we're breaking up into groups. It's like there are different Torahs for different people, and Klal Yisrael, we shouldn't have that. Now the Gemara explains how you see this from the word lo sisgodedu. Lo sisgodedu generally means you cannot cut yourself or scratch your skin as a sign of mourning for the dead. The word tizgodedu has two words in it. It has the word aguda in it and the word godu in it, which is giduda, which is a cut or a scratch. So the Gemara says that you learn two things here, because if it would just be giduda, it shouldn't have two sufs. It should be lo tagodu, and it should be lo tegodedu. And if it would just meant aguda, it shouldn't have two dalids. It should be lo tizgodu. So the two safs and the two dalids, lo tisgodedu, teaches us there are two separate mitzvahs here. One you can't cut as a sign of mourning, and one that you cannot make Klal Yisrael into groups. So the Gemara says that instead of answering Rish Lakish's question about how we're allowed to do the laning on different times, Rav Yochanan said, why are you asking about that? A whole bunch of other things you could ask about. For example, there's a Mishnah that says that there are different minhagim, whether you're allowed to do work on Erev Pesach from the beginning of the day until Chatzos or not. Some places do work, some places don't do work. Want to ask a question on that? So Rish Lakish says, what are you asking me why I didn't ask? What do you mean? That's a minig. Some people have the minig to do work, some people don't. I'm asking about where it's usher. Here it's mutter for these people to read the Megillah, and others it's usher for them to read the Megillah, and then on the next day it's vice versa. That's called different Torahs. We are different minhagim, whether you do work or not, that's not called different Torahs. So Gemara says, Rav Yochanan says, no, it's usher there also. There is an isser malacha, because we said that there's in a place where they had an isser malacha, they really made it real isser. We have Mishnah quotes Beis Shammai that says that it's usher, and Beis Hillel says it's mutter to do malacha. So we're talking about a real isser. So Gemara answers, no, that's different, because it doesn't look like an isser. You just see somebody not working, you don't see that he's actively keeping an isser. You just see that he's not working. You think maybe he doesn't have any work that he needs to do. So Gemara says that Rav Yochanan wasn't finished, and they said, why don't you ask a question on our Mishnah, where we see Beis Shammai held the Tzoros were mutter, and Beis Hillel Tzoros were usher, and all kinds of Yisurim that are based off of that. So Rish Lakish said, our Mishnah just said that they held that way. It doesn't say that they actually practiced that way. It's highly possible that Beis Shammai kept Beis Hillel's halacha, even though they held it differently. They were subservient to Beis Hillel, the halacha was like Beis Hillel, and therefore they followed his psak. Now the Gemara on the next daf will get into this more in a detail. Do we know that they kept their own halacha, or do we not?